Broken Blueprint by Vance Ferret, narrated by Samuel Nathan. Part 2b, United though separate. Something remarkably new. Ellen White also made another promise. She told Sutherland and Megan that if they would incorporate the new institution as an independent organization, she would serve on the board. At this juncture, the reader needs to understand that a momentous change in the spirit of prophecy guidance was about to take place. Prior to this time, Ellen White's life has been wrapped in the denominational work, but time after time she had seen heaven-sent opportunities and projects damaged or ruined by stubborn leaders or committees. It was now the summer of 1904. God revealed to her that the time had come for her to begin urging the formation of independent organizations faithful to the historic beliefs which would help fulfill the divine plan for training students, caring for the sick, producing publications, and giving the third angel's message to the world. A year later, Ellen White would be instrumental in the formation of the Loma Linda Project as a church-owned entity. She would personally help gather together the cream of blueprint-favoring workers, including Burden, Haskell, Howell, Abbott, and others to help get it started in the right way. Yet, by 1910 to 1912, all the workers she would send there would be shipped off by church leaders to other places or set in the background. Controlling church entities, in this instance the South Carolina Conference, assisted by the General Conference, would set in motion certain changes which ultimately reduced the medical blueprint to tatters. By the 1930s, these changes had set in motion a state of affairs which ultimately desolated our other educational institutions. More on this in part 3. All this was unknown to Ellen White in the summer of 1904, but God knew what was ahead and He guided her to do something totally unheard of. She helped a small independent group start an institution, and then specifically and repeatedly she demanded that they not permit it then or later to come under church control. Here is the story. Leaders shocked at new concepts. On June 30, 1904, Megan headed north to care for various duties in Berrien Springs, Battle Creek, and Washington, D.C. According to his diary, which he kept throughout his life, the plans suggested by Ellen White for the new school in Tennessee were not appreciated at General Conference headquarters. Some said too much land had been purchased. Others said it would bankrupt the church. Still others were upset at the idea of a work and study program. But everyone was fully aroused when they learned that Ellen White had urged the two men to incorporate it as an independent corporation. This one would not be under the church control. It was bad enough to purchase a large acreage of a school, one that would include agricultural work and all the things as part of the curriculum. But to do it independently, why? This was treason or rebellion, or some other ominous words. Early in the late 1880s, Sutherland and Megan had seen the General Conference Association loaded down with debts on educational and medical institutions. The two men were served for years as leading officers at Battle Creek College, struggling with a debt burden of $90,000, which others before them had brought upon it. And this was at the time when ministers and teachers only made $10 to $12 a week. So when asked, the men told church leaders that they intend to only build and enlarge as fast as funds come in. Another peculiar concept. How could a school be started, by the way? Yet all these strange ideas were part of the blueprint bequeathed to Sutherland and Meighen through the testimonies and direct counsels from Ellen White. Opposition begins. Although it may not have been intentional, church leaders effectively set to work to keep any monies from church members from going to this independent project. The project would either fail or be brought under church control. These twofold objectives continued for a very long time. 2 full years later, Ellen White demanded, quote, "The Lord does not set limit about his workers in some line as men are wont to set. In their work, Brethren Meighen and Sutherland have been hindered unnecessarily. Means have been withheld from them because in the organization and management of the Madison School, it was not placed under the control of the conference. But the reason why this school was not owned and controlled by the conference was not been duly considered. The Lord does not require that the education at Madison shall be changed all about before it can receive heartily support from our people. The work that had been done there is approved of God, and he forbids that this line of work shall be broken up. The Lord will continue to bless and sustain the workers as long as they follow his counsel." End of quote. Taken from Ellen G. White letter, June 18, 1907, Series B, number 11, page 32. Organizational structure of Madison. All these make us curious. Just what was the organizational structure that Ellen White specified for the new project? In June 1904, in the time that she told the 2 men to purchase the Nelson farm, she also told them something very startling. They must make sure the new project never be placed under the denominational control. She explained that in order to do this, they must incorporate the property under state law as a non-profit corporation, and she said she would serve on the board of directors. That was equally startling. At no other time did Ellen White ever serve on the church as institutional board of any kind. She had never done this earlier, and she never did it later. It had been revealed to her that she would need to do it on this occasion in order to demonstrate to church leaders and members everywhere that it was not wrong to start independent ministries, and that the little group had her full backing. With Ellen White on board, it would be very difficult for church leaders to denounce Madison as a renegade in rebellion against duly authorized church control. These folks were fully in harmony with this historic belief and standard. Indeed, they were defending, practicing, and promoting them better than many others in the church were. To make matters worse, while Madison was operating an independent worker training center and sanitarium elsewhere, Edson White was publishing and selling books without church permission. Ellen White had been shown by God that henceforth it would be necessary for an independent ministry to carry on the educational, medical, missionary, and publishing work for our people. No longer were God's people to assume that the denomination should be in charge of everything that was done. Indeed, she knew that they would have to tackle challenges and enter upon new fields and projects which church leaders at times would refuse to do. From time to time, the question had been raised as to whether our independent ministries should form corporations. The answer is that it was Ellen White who gave instruction that it be done. Ellen White not only demanded that the new institutions would not be owned or controlled by the denomination, but she told its founders that it must be incorporated later under the laws of the state of Tennessee. She did this because she had been instructed that corporations were far more enduring than private and partnership organizations. If Madison had been privately owned or a legal partnership, it would be easier for the General Conference to later penetrate and take control of it, or the children of the owners might turn it over to the church or leave the faith, taking it with them. In Madison, we have a property held at Ellen White's request by a group of independent missionaries and chartered at her request as a non-profit corporation. It is of interest that Ellen White later arranged that the ownership of her book work also be placed in an independent organization, the Ellen G. White Estate Incorporation. However, after her death, each board members chose to accept denominational salaries. This brought the board back under quasi-denominational control. Here is a statement from the Cooperative Golden Anniversary album of Madison. It revealed that it was Ellen White who decided the type of organizational structure it would have. Quote, Elder and Mrs. Hess and Haskell, at the request of the founders, held title to the newly purchased property until a corporation could be formed. Mrs. Ellen G. White was very emphatic about how the title should be held and where the control of this new property would rest. Dr. Floyd Braley, well known throughout the church as a naturalist, a writer, and a prominent Madison worker from the early years until he was laid to rest in 1952, quotes Mrs. White as follows, quote, Now I want you to know that I had been shown how this school should be organized. It is not to be organized like our other schools, neither owned or controlled like them. I want you, Professor Megan, to go with me, and we will get hold of an Anthony, and we will get him to draw up the papers and take it to the state authorities to get the institution incorporated. And I may stay here until we get that done, and then I will go to California. I want you, Professor Sutherland, to go north and see if you can get enough money to make the first payment on this place, about $5,000. And we will attend to the organization down here. End of quote. Taken from A Pictorial History of Madison College, a School of Divine Origin, 1904 to 1964. While Sutherland went off to try to raise more money, Ellen White stayed behind to make sure the property was duly incorporated in the Secretary of State's office at the state capitol in Nashville. She would not head west to her home at Haven until Madison had been independently incorporated. This was no fly-by-night decision on her part. Ellen White was one of the original incorporators of the project, and she became one of the 10 trustee board members. She remained on the board till she was too feeble to continue, not resigning until 1914. The underlying principle. It was an intriguing fact that Ellen White did something similar to the 1901 General Conference session. Having returned only a few months earlier from Australia, at that session she pushed through a decentralization of the denomination. No longer could the central authority, the General Conference at Battle Creek, dictate what was done in the divisions, union, conference, and their entities. The objective was to enable our administrators and workers on all levels to look directly to God for guidance. Quote, the division of the General Conference into District Union Conference was God's arrangement. In the work of the Lord for these last days, there are to be no Jerusalem centers, no kingly power, and the work in the different country is not to be tied up by contracts to the work centering in Battle Creek. For this is not God's plan. End of quote. Taken from Unpublished Testimonies, page 368. It was thus a follow-through part on the overall plan that in 1904, Ellen White was directed to initiate independent ministry which would train more independent workers, ministries, and training schools. Laymen were to set to work and alone or in little groups carry on missionary work. That is taken from volume 7 of Testimonies, page 18 to 28. Is an example of this. Quote, for several years I have been warned that there is danger, constant danger, of men looking to men for permission to do this or that instead of looking to God for themselves. Thus they become weaklings bound about with human ties that God has not ordained. The Lord can impress minds and conscience to do His work. End of quote. Taken from Unpublished Testimonies, page 366. It is good that we should counsel together, but in the work of the Lord we should not be mere automatons doing what others tell us. Quote, in no conference should propositions be rushed through without time being taken by the brethren to weigh carefully all sides of the questions, because the president of a conference suggested certain plans. It has sometimes been considered unnecessarily to consult the Lord about them. Thus, propositions have been accepted that were not for the spiritual benefits of the believers and that involved far more than was apparent at the first casual consideration. Such considerations are not in the order of God. End of quote. Taken from volume 9 of Testimonies, page 278. Church leaders arrive. There were so many things which needed to be done for the farm, and Ellen White stayed there for a few days to encourage the workers during this time. Faithful Elder Haskell had sole legal control of the property. Ellen White knew he could be trusted not to turn it over to the church without a permission, which he had no intention of giving. By this time, it was early August. Megan was busily counseling with Ellen White to make sure that the incorporation proceed exactly in accordance with her wishes. But soon visitors arrived. Thoroughly aroused at what they had learned from Sutherland, a number of church leaders journeyed to Madison to see what was happening and, if possible, prevent the catastrophe of a separate organization. Here are 3 successive entries from Megan's diary in his quintessential style. Quote, August 7, 1901. Had a talk with Sister White regarding our plan for organization. She approved of the same. W.C. White was present. August 8, 1904. Workers with WCW during the forenoon getting article of plans ready regarding incorporating schools in Nashville. In the afternoon met Daniel, Prescott, Griggs, Walshburn, Baird, W.C. White to consider our plan of organization. Daniels didn't like it. Prescott thought we traveled too much. So did Daniels. Blaine thought other teachers would envy our independence and would want to do likewise. August 9, 1904, Washington. Spent forenoon with Daniels. Had a very satisfactory conversation. Told him why our school was independent and would have to eat showbread. End of quote. Taken from Megan Diary entries for Sunday through Thursday, August 7 to 9, 1904. Although the independent conversation with Ellen White's idea, and although her son, Willie C. White, was working with Megan on corporate plans, Daniels expressed himself as fully in opposition to it. In addition, both Prescott and Daniels did not appreciate the fact that Megan and Sutherland were traveling about the countryside raising money for an independent ministry, which was not under leadership control. By Tuesday, August 9, Daniels appeared more mollified, but later months and years would prove his favor to be short-lived. Opposition continues. Let us now turn the clock backwards nearly 2 years. By this time, Daniels was demanding that church offices throughout the continent put a stop to any and all efforts by the folks at Madison to obtain donations. In his view, church control was more important than fulfilling blueprints or carrying on missionary work. Daniels was not a bad person, he was just misguided. When you have arisen to leadership of a church, it is easy to think that everyone should be obeying someone else. There are 2 more diary entries by Megan. Quote, May 7, 1907. Paradise Valley. Talk to Sister White regarding attitude of General Conference towards us. Miss Sarah McEnteffer and Lillian present. Told Sister White that the administration held we had no right to get the money unless we were owned by the conference. She replied, You are doing double what you are. Take all the donations you can get. This money belongs to the Lord and not to those men. The positions they take is not of God. The Southern Union Conference is not to own or control you. You cannot turn things over to them. May 14, 1907. Loma Linda. To see Sister White, I talked to her about the General Conference position that concerns non-conference owned should have no money. She answered, Daniels and those with him have taken a position on this matter that is not of God. She said she had something written on this and would try to find it. End of quote. Taken from Megan Diary entries for Tuesday, May 7 and Tuesday, May 14, 1907. Ellen White strongly objects. Apparently, Ellen White did not find what she had written on the subject. On that day, May 14, she wrote a follow-up letter to Megan stating her convictions in the matter even more strongly. I bear positive testimony that you and your fellow workers in Madison are doing the work that God had appointed to you. The attitude of opposition or indifference on the part of some of your brethren has created conditions that have made your work more difficult than it should have been. But the Lord is pleased that you have not been easily discouraged. Some have entertained the idea that because the school at Madison is not owned by a conference organization, those people who are in charge of the school should not be permitted to call upon our people for the means that is greatly needed to carry on their work. This idea needs to be corrected. The Lord Jesus would one day call to account those who would so tie your hands that it is almost impossible for you to move in harmony with the Lord's biddings. You are just as much entitled to ask for that which you need as are other men to present the necessities of the work in which they are engaged. As you carry on this work in harmony with the Lord's will, you are not to be kept in constant strain to know how to secure the means you need in order to go forward. The Lord forbids the setting up of wall and brands around workers of experience who are faithfully acting their God-given part. Much precious times had been lost because man-made rules and restrictions have been sometimes placed above the plan and purposes of God. In the name of the Lord, I appeal to our conference workers to strengthen and support and labor in harmony with our brethren at Madison, who are carrying forward a work that God has appointed them. End of quote. That is from Ellen G. White to P.C. Megan, May 14, 1907. Spading Megan Unpublished Testimonies, page 411 to 412. Elder W.C. White, Ellen White's son, was a constant companion. He knew her thinking and unfailingly stood in support of her decisions. Quote, May 23, 1907, St. Helena spent the forenoon with W.C. White. He gave me Sister White's letter to Daniels regarding us. He told me he did not agree with the administration at Washington in insisting that all monies pass through their hands. Said that he would not agree to our going under conference denomination. End of quote. Megan Diary Entry, Thursday, May 23, 1907. Before leaving this matter, it should be noted that an earlier letter by Ellen White, written to Elder Watson, president of the Colorado Conference, was also over this battle for fund. In a letter dated January 22, 1905, she forcefully told Watson that he had no right forbidding the sending of tithe by the church members directly to independent ministries. If you wish to read the entire letter, you will find it on page 215 to 216 of this book, Spading Megan Unpublished Testimonies. It is also available in the unusually complete Spirit of Prophecy compilation, The Truth About Tithe, available for the publisher of this present book. Quote, one delicate problem of a self-supporting institution independent of direct guidance of the conference was the source from which funds might be secured, especially for the purchase of property and the construction of the buildings. Naturally, the leaders of the new school thought of their friends and former associates who live in areas where money flows more freely. Appeals made from the south would, of course, lead to response from the north and west, and it was not easy at times for those carrying the responsibilities of local work to stand by and watch sizable amount of money being sent to another field. End of quote. Taken from Merlin Neff, For God and CME, page 114. All the while, Ellen White was busily writing letters. Here is part of one from January 1908. Quote, the Lord works through various agencies. If there are those who desire to step into new fields and take up new lines of labor, encourage them to do so. Seventh-day Adventists are doing a great and good work. Let no man's hand be raised to hinder his brother. Those who have had experience in the work of God should be encouraged to follow the guidance and counsel of the Lord. Do not worry lest some men shall go direct to those who are trying to do missionary work in a quiet and effective way. All the means is not to be handled by one agency or one organization. There is much business to be done conscientiously for the cause of God. Help is to be sought from every possible source. End of quote. Taken from Ellen G. White to those bearing the responsibility in Washington and other centers, January 6, 1908. Unpublished Testimonies, page 420 1 to 422. A letter continues. To those in conference who have felt that they had authority to forbid the gathering of means in a certain territory, I now say, this matter had been presented to me again and again. I now bear my testimony in the name of the Lord to those whom it concerns. Wherever you are, withhold your forbiddings. The work of God is not to be thus trammeled. God is being faithfully served by those men whom you have been watching and criticizing. They fear and honor the Lord. They are laborers together with Him. God forbids you to put any yoke on the neck of His servants. It is the privilege of those workers to accept gifts or loans that they may invest them to help in doing an important work that greatly needs to be done. This wonderful burden of responsibility which some suppose God has placed upon them with their official position has never been laid upon them. If men were standing free on the platform of truth, they would never accept the responsibility to frame rules and regulations to bind and cramp God's chosen laborers in their work of the training of missionaries. When they learn the lesson that all ye are brethren, they will remove the yokes that are now binding their brethren. End of quote. I bid. The forbidding becomes official. Unfortunately, Ellen White's counsel was totally ignored. 4 months later, the May 14 issue of the Review reported a General Conference action that no money should be made available to independent ministries. It said in part, quote, resolve that any special enterprise for which donations are solicited for the people should first receive the sanction of the General Conference and the Union Conference in which such enterprise is undertaken, and that any person sent out to solicit such donation first receive suitable credentials from the Union Conference from which he comes, and that satisfactory arrangement be made, certified in writing with the union and local conference in which he wishes to solicit before he enters upon his work. End of quote. Taken from Conference Action Report in Review, May 14, 1908. As soon as a copy of this issue of the Review reached air, only 12 days from Washington, D.C. to California, she wrote a blithering letter addressed to all leaders at the General Conference. Here are the few excerpts of this lengthy letter. Quote, to the officials of the General Conference, when I read the resolution published in the Review, placing so many restrictions upon those who may be sent out to gather funds, I was sorry for the many restrictions. Unless the converting grace of God comes into the conference, a course will be taken that will bring the displeasure of God upon them. We have had enough of the spirit of forbidding. This morning I could not sleep after midnight. I awoke bearing this message to our leading men. Break every yoke that would hinder or limit the power of the third angel's message. The calls that have been made for large liberality, which have been responded to so nobly by our people, should lead to feelings of confidence and gratitude rather than to the placing of yoke upon the neck of God's servants. A much greater work would have been done if men had not been so jealous to watch and hinder some who were seeking to obtain means from the people to carry forward the work of the Lord. Is man to be a dictator of his fellow men? He is to take responsibility of saying, Ye shall not go to such a place. There is need of a great reformation in our ranks. End of quote. E.G. White to the official of the General Conference, May 26, 1908. Low-cost book sales. A related source of irritation to church leaders was the fact that the workers in the South were publishing and selling books at prices below that of the regular publishing houses. Believers were donating funds to independent groups which not only helped them in their mission work but also enabled them to publish these low-cost books. Quote, the people to whom God has given these means are amenable to Him alone. It is their privilege to give direct aid and assistance to missions. It is because of the misappropriation of means by the regular channels that the Southern field is no better showing than it is today. I do not consider it the duty of the Southern branch of our work in the publication and handling of books to be under the dictation of our established publishing houses. And if means can be devised to reduce the expense of publishing and circulating my books, let this be done. I wish to say, my brother, that I have no desire to see the work in the South moving forward in the whole regular lines. When I see how strongly the idea prevails that the method of handling our books in the past shall be retained because what has been must be, I have no heart to advise that former customs shall continue. End of quote. Taken from Ellen G. White, Letter 60, 1901. Why did Ellen White consider the book work so important? Because he knew that when low-cost copies of our best missionary publication are placed in the hands of believers, it is the most powerful way to spread the truth faster and wider than living preachers could. This is why she frequently called them the silent preachers. In a dream, in Testimony, Volume 9, page 66 to 75, Ellen White was shown the importance of heavily reducing the prices of missionary books and the position it would receive. In the first part of the dream, she was shown the importance of distributing Spirit of Prophecy books and other books which reveal Satan's devices. Later in the dream, Christ Himself speaks, quote, because books were being sold at low prices, some being especially reduced for the occasion, many were purchased, and some by persons not of our faith. They said, it must be that these books contain a message for us. These people were willing to make sacrifices in order that we may have them, and we will secure them for ourselves and our friends. But dissatisfaction was expressed by some of our own people. One said, a stop must be put to this work or our businesses will be spoiled. As one brother was carrying away an armful of books, a canvasser laid his hands upon his arm and said, my brother, what are you doing with so many books? Then I heard the voice of our counselor saying, forbid them not. This is a work that should be done. The end is near. Already much time has been lost when these books should have been in circulation. Sell them far and near. Scatter them like the leaves of autumn. This work is to be continued without the forbidding of anyone. Souls are perishing out for Christ. Let them be warned of His soon appearing in the clouds of heaven. Some of the workers continued to appear much cast down. One was weeping and said, These are doing the publishing work an injustice by purchasing these books at so low a price. Besides, this work is depriving us of some of the revenues by which our work is sustained. The voice replied, "You are meeting with no loss. These workers who take the books at reduced price could not obtain so readily sales for them except it be at this so-called sacrifice. Many are now purchasing for these friends and for themselves who otherwise would not think of buying." End of quote. Taken from Volume 9 of Testimonies, page 72 to 73. Earlier independent publications. It is a significant fact that Ellen White's attention was turned to independent printing faculties over a decade before she urged independent training schools. Following the crisis at the 1888 conference, when important leaders at the Review and General Conference opposed her message for a time, she was guided to publish a next book release, Steps to Christ, 1892, through an outside publishing house, Filming Age Revell Co. Later in the spring of 1903, as the book Education was nearing completion, she very nearly gave the book to Sutherland and Megan at Emmanuel Missionary College to print. Both her son, W.C. White, and C.H. Jones were in on the project. That can be found in Megan Diary entry, March 25 to 26, 1903. Repeatedly, the independent ministry in the South published various missionary publications. In late 1910, she arranged for a small printing press to be purchased for her grandchildren, the twins, Henry and Herbert, so they could start an independent printing business in Battle Creek, which they did with favor. One of them, Herbert, was still printing independent books as late as the 1950s. In later years, P.C. Megan, by that time at Loma Linda, wanted to print a book, Counsels to Medical Workers, compiled from the writings of Ellen White, but met with such stiff opposition from church leaders that he gave up the project. Church leaders said they did not want him to receive the royalties on such a book, which he wanted to use to help fund graduating medical students when they first went to foreign fields. The Review and Pacific Press wanted to keep the royalties for themselves. The later books, Counsels on Health in 1923 and Medical Ministry in 1932, were not as rich in the available resource from her writing on the subject as his would have been. Our own compilation, the Medical Missionary Manual, probably comes closer to his plan. In 1921, Megan wrote a letter to the CME president about the problem. The letter is remarkable for what it tells us. Ellen White strongly considered removing all her books from denominational control and publication. Quote, "I have a letter from C.H. Jones, manager at the Pacific Press, telling how the council turned down our proposition concerning royalties on the medical books. This, however, was no disappointment to me, as I knew that would be the end of the matter in the hands of the man who handled it. There is absolutely nothing to their arguments except unbelief in the spirit of prophecy on the royalty questions. Sister White foresaw all of this many years ago. She had absolutely no confidence in the management of the Review and Herald as it existed at that time, and she begged W.C. White to take her books away from them and also from the Pacific Press, and urged that they should publish her testimonies themselves. I was living in her house and working for her at that time, and she talked to me about the matter, not once or twice, but over and over again. I greatly fear that this royalty question is just one link in a long cable of apostasy that is coming on. I do not want, however, to get into the state of mind where I will charge apostasy against my brethren and not feel that I am in danger along the same line myself. You and I and our medical group have much to do to keep our work where God wants it to be. It would have cost the Review and Herald and the Pacific Press no more to let the money, which properly should go to the authors as royalties, go into missions, as a gift from the publishing house who have already no right to it at all. End of quote. Taken from Megan to Newton Evans, CME President, November 11, 1921. It is clear from the above letter that Ellen White was guided to want her books henceforth to be published by independent ministries. She had been shown that there was great danger when a single organization, even though it be our own denomination, could have printing and copyright control over all her writings. As example of this danger is shown in the earlier 1980s when a young believer in Switzerland, primarily at his own expense doing paper hangings, printed great controversy in Romanian, German, and French. He smuggled the Romanian print ruins at great danger to himself into Romania, still at that time behind the Iron Curtain. But our Hamburg publishing house, Advent Werk in Hamburg, Germany, threatened to have him jailed for copyright infringement when he tried to widely distribute German and French edition of the book. Yet there was no error in these editions. He had only typeset from standard German and French editions. Within a couple of years, he totally gave up in discouragement. The present author has copies of every great controversy printed by our publishing houses throughout the world for purposes of reprinting. Edition of that book printed by the denomination are generally very costly, and not many are sold. The Spading Megan Collection. This opposition to Madison and related independent ministry publishing and missionary project continued for years. If you question the fact, purchase a copy of the unpublished testimony, also called the Spading and Megan Unpublished Testimony. It's 498, 8.5 times 11 page containing 151 letters, primarily consists of letters by Ellen White about this and other matters relating to the work of independent ministry, primarily in the Southern Field. Available from Leaves of Autumn Books, Box 440, Payson, AZ 85541. The history of Madison is highly significant. Ellen White spent so much time pleading, praying, and writing in defense of it. Madison represented something very important, a way that God's work would be able to more fully succeed in later years. Looking back on it, with all that we know today, we can understand why God also wanted independent ministry to help finish the work on earth.